Hi 5th grade, this is Mrs. Gyoka with your flipped math lesson for today, 9-6. Today's objective is I can find common denominators for fractions with unlike denominators. So if we have a fraction where the denominators are different, we have two fractions, say like 1/2, and we have the fraction maybe 2/3. Our denominators here are 2 and 3, they're different. So what we're going to try to do today is find a common denominator, a denominator that's the same for unlike fractions, or fractions with unlike denominators. Here is our practice problem. Jacob divided a rectangle into thirds. Melissa divided a rectangle into fourths. How can you divide a rectangle of the same size so you can see both the thirds and the fourths? Okay. So what it's asking us to do is, how can you divide a rectangle the same size so you can see both thirds and fourths? Okay. So here's what I did. I've got Jacob's rectangle over here. He divided his into thirds, and Melissa divided hers into fourths. And you can see that Jacob's thirds, of course, have 3 equal pieces. Melissa's fractions are 4 equal pieces. Well, how can you divide them so that you have a denominator that's the same amount of equal pieces that still shows the same amount? So here's what I did below is I changed the rectangle into 12. So I'll show you how I did that. I just took Jacob's, and there we go, and I just moved it on top of Melissa's to show you that now I have fourths, or I'm sorry, I have twelfths. I have 12 equal pieces. Okay, so what I did is I found a rectangle and I divided it into equal pieces that still shows the same amount that Jacob had. It still shows the same amount that Melissa had. It's just cut into a different amount of pieces. Okay, so here's an example. Like if I took Jacob's and I want to compare 1/3, and I have Melissa's and I want to compare that to 1/4. When I cut the rectangles into 12ths, it's still the same size rectangle. It just looks a little different. So I'm going to color in. I've colored in up here on the thirds. I've colored in that section. I'm going to color in the same amount on the 12ths rectangle. And you can see when I color in the same amount, I'm coloring 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So 1/3 up here, 1/3 is equal to 4/12. It's an equivalent fraction, right? It's equal to each other. It's equivalent. Over here on Melissa's, I have 1/4 colored in. I'm going to color in the exact same amount on the 12ths rectangle. And you can see I'm going to color in 1, 2, 3 sections. So now I know that 1/4 equals 3/12. Okay, so I can see that 1/3 equals 4/12 and 1/4 equals 3/12. If I was going to compare just these two numbers, 4/12 and 3/12, which one is more? Which one is bigger? Well, 4/12 covers up more area than 3/12 does. Okay? 4/12 and 3/12 now have a common denominator. That means that the number on the bottom is the same. It started off with 1/3 and 1/4. The denominators were different. Now I made them have the same denominator. Okay, I found a common denominator. That's what that means, the same denominator. Well, how can you find a common denominator? There's several different ways that you can go about finding the common denominator. You're going to need a common denominator in order to add and subtract fractions, which will be coming up in a later lesson. Today we're just going to practice on how to find a common denominator, making those denominators the same for two fractions. Well, here's the first option. Option number 1, you can multiply the two denominators together. Okay, so if I have 7/12 and I have 5/6, I know that I have 12 and 6, and I know that if I multiply them together, 12 times 6, I'm going to get 72. I know that 72 is a multiple of 12. I know 72 is a multiple of 6. Okay, so you could just multiply those two denominators together, and that's fine. Then, when you do that, you're going to have to change your fraction to equivalent fraction. So, to get to 72, to change 12 to 72, I have to multiply it 6 times. Whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So, I'll have to multiply 7 times 6. To get from 6 to 72, I have to multiply it 12 times. Okay, the opposite denominator. Then, whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So I multiply the 5 times 12. And then I get an equivalent fraction for 7/12, and I'll get an equivalent fraction for 5/6. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I know the denominators for both fractions are going to be 72. Because 12 times 6 is 72, and 6 times 12 is 72. Okay? Now I'm going to do 7 times 6. 7 times 6 equals 42. So 7/12 equals 42 72nds. Okay, now let's do 5/6. I did 6 times 12 to get 72. Now I have to do 5 times 12. 5 times 12 is 60. So 5/6 equals 60 72nds. Okay, that's how we find an equivalent denominator, or I'm sorry, a common denominator. That's one way. Just multiply the two denominators together. Another option, option number 2. This is actually the option that I would start with. Check to see if one denominator is a multiple of the other denominator. Okay, so that means that when we have 12 as our denominator here, and we have 6 as our denominator here, the multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, and so on. I see that 12 is one of its multiples. Well, 12 is right here. So I'm going to leave 7/12 the same, and I'm going to change the 6 to a 12. To change that to 12, I'm going to have to multiply it times 2. 6 times 2 will equal 12. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 5 times 2 is going to equal 10. So now I have the fraction 7/12 and I have the fraction 10/12. They have a common denominator. The 12 is the same denominator in both fractions. Okay, so you can just check, see if one denominator is a multiple of the other one, and that's a real easy way to see. Now if it isn't, you can multiply the denominators together like we did in option number 1, or you can use option number 3 and find the least common multiple of both denominators as a new denominator. Okay, now last time we learned how to do the least common multiple. That's what we're going to use to find the least common multiple to use for our common denominator. So let's start by looking at our denominators here. We have 3 and 2. So the multiples of 3, let's just do a few, are 3, 6, 9. Multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6. Oh, there's a common denominator. It's the least common denominator. Or I'm sorry, common multiple, sorry, excuse me, is 6. So 6 is the least common multiple. We're going to make it a common denominator now. So instead of having 3 as the denominator of this fraction, I'm going to change it to 6. Instead of having 2 as the denominator, I'm going to have to change that to 6. So I had to take 3 times 2 to get 6. Whatever I do to the bottom, I got to do to the top. So I'm going to take 2 times 2 and make that 4. So now instead of 2/3, I have 4/6. 2 is going to change to 6 over here in the second fraction. In order to change it to 6, I have to multiply it times 3. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I multiply the numerator by 3 as well. 1 times 3 is 3. 3/6 is an equivalent fraction to 1/2. Now 4/6 and 3/6 both have a common denominator. They both have 6 as the denominator. Okay, so let's practice. We're going to try to make common denominators. That means the denominator is the same for two different fractions. Find a common denominator for two fractions, then rename the fraction. So we have 2/3 and 3/4. One option, my first option, is to look and see if one of the denominators is a multiple of the other, and these are not. So I'm going to go to my next option. I could multiply the numbers together. Let's try that. I can use 3 times 4 is 12. So I'm going to change both denominators to 12. To get from 3 to 12, I have to multiply it times 4. To get 4 to 12, I have to multiply it times 3. Now on my numerators, I have to do the same thing to the numerator that I did to the denominator of the fraction. Okay, so I multiplied 3 times 4 to get 12, so I have to multiply 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8. Over on the next fraction, I did 4 times 3 to get 12. Now I'm going to do 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, so now I have renamed the fraction. So I have changed the denominator, and I've made new fractions. Number 2, 1/6 and 1/3. Find a common denominator. And to do that, first I'm going to see if one is a multiple of the other. Well, I see I've got 6 and 3. I know 6 is a multiple of 3 because 3 times 2 is 6. So I'm going to keep 1/6 the same, and I'm going to change 1/3. I'm going to change its denominator to 6. In order to do that, I have to multiply that 3 times 2 to get 6. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I do 1 times 2 as well. 1 times 2 is 2. So now I have common denominators, and I have renamed the fraction by making a whole new fraction. Number 3, 3/8 and 2/3. I'm going to look at the denominators. I have an 8 and I have a 3. And 8 is not a multiple of 3. So I'm going to look this time at the multiples and see if I can find the least common multiple. The multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. I'm going to move that 8 over, I think, a little bit. 18, 24. I think I'll stop right there. The multiples of 8 are 8, 16, and 24. Oh, I see a common multiple. So 24 is going to be our new denominator. And I multiply to get to 24. I'm going to have to multiply 8 times 3, not 8 times 4. 8 times 3 will equal 24. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 3 to get 9. Over on the other fraction, 2/3, to get that 3 to 24, I have to multiply it times 8. 3 times 8 is 24. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. 2 times 8 is 16. So now we have common denominators. We have 24 on both of them, and we have renamed the fraction. Okay, let's try another one. 3/7 and 1/2. First thing I'm going to do is see if one of the denominators is a multiple of the other. Well, 7 is not a multiple of 2. So I can multiply the denominators together. That's an option. Let's do that. 7 times 2 is 14. So 14 is going to be my common denominator. Okay, so I can go ahead and change both denominators to 14. I have to remember, how do I get to 14? Well, to get from 7 to 14, I multiply times 2. To get whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So I have to do 3 times 2. 3 times 2 is 6. So now I have my new fraction, 6/14 instead of 3/7. On the other fraction, on 1/2, I multiply 2 times 7 to get to 14. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I multiply 1 times 7. Instead of 1/2, now I have 7/14. Okay, so now I have renamed my fractions. Your turn. You're going to find the common denominator of 1/5 and 3/10. Pause the video and then I'll show you my solution. Okay, the common denominator for them is 10 because 10 is a multiple of 5. So I kept 3/10. It's still the same fraction. That doesn't change because it's already 10. And then to get the 5 to 10, I have to multiply it times 2. And whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I'll have to do 1 times 2, which equals 2. So that fraction 1/5 becomes 2/10. All right, try another. Number 6, 1/2 and 2/5. Okay, now this is the denominator I found. I found 10. I took the 2 times 5, and that equals 10. To get 2 to 10, I have to multiply it times 5. So that means I need to multiply the 1 times 5. And that means my new fraction down here is 5/10. To get 5 is the denominator to 10. I have to multiply it times 2. So then I multiply the numerator by 2. And I get my new fraction 4/10. Okay? Number 7, 4/5 and 3/8. Okay, so I took 5 times 8 and I got 40. So that's my new denominator for both fractions. To get 5 to 40, I had to multiply times 8. So whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 8 times 4 will be 32. And on the other fraction, 3/8, to get 8 to 40, I have to multiply it times 5. So I multiply the numerator by 5 as well. And 3 times 5 is 15. Okay. Number 8, 4/5 and 3/20. Okay, for my denominator, my common denominator, I kept the number 20 because 20 is a multiple of 5, so I just kept this denominator. So for 20 to get to 20, it's already there, so my fraction 3/20 can stay the same. To get 5 to 20, I have to multiply it, not multiply it times 5, multiply it times 4. So I multiply the numerator by 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, so we have a common denominator and we've renamed the fractions. Number 9, 2/5 and 1/6. Find the common denominator and rename the fractions. Okay, so I multiplied 5 times 6 and I got 30 as my denominator. To get to 30, I have to multiply 5 times 6. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I multiply 2 times 6 and I get 12. Over on my fraction 1/6, to get the 6 to 30, I have to multiply it times 5. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I multiply 1 times 5. So now we have renamed our fractions and we have common denominator of 30. Number 10, 3/10 and 3/8. Okay, for this one I have the common denominator of 40. And I could have multiplied them together and got 80, and that would have worked. However, there is a denominator that is smaller, a lesser denominator, and I found that by doing the multiples of 10. The multiples of 10 are 10, 20, 30, 40, 40, and so on. The multiples of 8 are 8, 16, 24, 32, and 40. So the lowest common multiple, or the least common multiple, is 40. So I used that. So to get to 40, I'm going to erase this real quick. To get to 40, I have to multiply 10 times 4. Whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So 3 times 4 is 12. To get 8 to 40, I have to multiply it times 5. Whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So I do 3 times 5 equals 15. So I have a common denominator of 40, and I've renamed my fractions. Okay, number 11. So we're going to use some mixed numbers this time. I'm going to let you try it and see if you can find the common denominator. Okay, so for this one, I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to find a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the 2 times the 3 to get 6. So our new common denominator is going to be 6. Our whole numbers are going to stay the same. They're not going to change. Okay? And then I'm just multiplying the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So to get that 2 and 1/2, the 2 to change to 6, I had to multiply it times 3. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So 1/2 becomes 3/6. And the 3 and 1/3, I multiply that 3 times 2 to get it to be 6. And to get, whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I multiply the 1 times 2 as well, and I get 2. So now my new fractions are 2 and 3/6, and 3 and 2/6. Okay? Number 12. Try this mixed number. 4 and 2/5, and 3 and 1/4. Okay, so I'm just going to multiply the denominators together. 4 times 5, or 5 times 4 is 20. That's going to be my new common denominator. The whole number is going to stay the same. That's not going to change at all. And then I just change my numerator by multiplying it times the same number I multiplied my denominator by. So to get 5 to 20, I have to multiply times 4. So I multiply the numerator by 4. 2 times 4 is 8. And 1/4 over here, 3 1/4. To get the 4 to 20, I have to multiply it times, whoops, I'm going crazy. Multiply it times 5. So I multiply the 1, the numerator, by 5. 5 times 1 is 5. Okay, so those are my new fractions. All right, you are finished for today. Have a good night, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.